Two friends, same salary, same apartment complex, same boring 9 to 5. Let's call them Maya and Jordan because their real names don't matter, only the decision they made. At 25, Maya starts putting $300 a month into a simple index fund. She does this for exactly 10 years. Then, at 35, she stops. Not because she got rich, not because she panicked, but because life happened, a mortgage, a kid, a career pivot. She never adds another dollar. She just lets the account sit there, untouched, for the next 30 years. Jordan waits. Jordan is cautious, wants to get more stable first, wants to pay off some debt, wants to feel ready. At 35, Jordan finally starts, and to Jordan's credit, once he starts, he doesn't stop. He puts in that same $300 a month, every single month, for the next 30 years, all the way to age 65. Now here's the question I want you to actually sit with for 5 seconds before you keep reading. Who has more money at 65? Jordan put in $108,000 of his own cash over 3 decades of discipline. Maya put in $36,000, a third of that, over 1 single decade, and then did absolutely nothing for 30 years straight, at a 7% average annual return, which is roughly what a diversified stock portfolio has returned after inflation over the long run historically. Jordan ends up at around $366,000. Maya ends up at around $421,000. Read that again. Maya invested for 10 years and then stopped completely. Jordan invested for 3 times as long and put in 3 times as much money. And Maya still wins by 50 grand. This is not a trick, and it's not a rare fluke of one lucky decade. It's math, cold, repeatable, unemotional math. And once you actually understand why it happens, you will never look at your bank account, your paycheck, or your 20s the same way again. Here's the mechanism, stripped of all the poetic language people usually wrap around it. When your money is invested, it earns a return. The next year, it earns a return on the original amount plus the return from last year. The year after that, it earns a return on all of that. Your money isn't just growing, the size of the thing that's growing is growing. That's the entire secret. There's no genius stock pick required, no insider tip, no market timing wizardry. The only ingredient that matters more than anything else is time. Because time is what lets that snowball effect stack on top of itself over and over. There's a shortcut for estimating how this plays out, and it's called the rule of 72. Take the number 72 and divide it by your expected annual return. That tells you roughly how many years it takes for your money to double. At 7, that's about 10.3 years. So if you put in $10,000 today and never touch it again, in roughly 10 years you'd have around $20,000. 10 years after that, around $40,000. 10 years after that, 80, then 160, then $320,000. Notice something, for the first 20 years, the actual dollar growth feels almost insulting. You go from $10,000 to $40,000 real progress. Sure, but it took 2 full decades and you're still nowhere near rich. But that same doubling applied one more time takes you from $160,000 to $320,000, a $160,000 jump in a single decade. More money created in 10 years than you had in total after your first 20. Nothing about the process changed, the rate didn't change. What changed is the size of the base the rate was working on. This is the part almost nobody explains properly. And it's the actual reason the first several years of investing feel completely pointless. A 10% return on $2,000 is $200. That's not enough to matter, not enough to feel real, not enough to make you believe any of this works. A 10% return on $200,000 is $20,000 more than a lot of people's entire annual take-home pay, generated without lifting a finger in a single year for money that already existed. Same percentage, same effort, completely different emotional experience. Almost everyone quits during the first phase. precisely because the first phase is designed by math itself to feel like nothing is happening. Right up until, quietly, without an announcement, it stopped feeling like nothing. Maya's advantage wasn't intelligence. It wasn't income. It was that her money got a fairlier head start on compounding on top of itself, while Jordan's weighted dollars never got the chance to experience their own 20s. The 10 years Maya invested early were, in effect, worth more than the 20 extra years Jordan invested later, because Maya's early dollars had 3 full decades to double and double and double again, while Jordan's dollars, especially the ones he put in during his 50s and 60s, barely had time to double even once before he needed the money. If there's one sentence I'd want tattooed on the inside of every 20-something's eyelids, it says, the money you invested 25 is not the same as the money you invested 45, even if it's the exact same number of dollars. A dollar invested early is a different species of dollar. It has decades left to work. A dollar invested late is already running out the clock the moment it arrives. Okay, so time is the multiplier. But most people reading this aren't wondering about abstract math. They're wondering something much more urgent. I don't have decades of runway left to just start early. And I don't have some trust fund lump sum sitting around. What do I actually control right now today, with an ordinary paycheck? This is where I want to hand you the single most under-discussed number in personal finance. Because unlike vague advice to cut back on lattes or ask for a raise, this one is brutally, precisely quantifiable, and it will genuinely change how you see your own paycheck. It's your savings rate percentage of your income you actually keep and invest, not the percentage you earn. Here's what happens when you run the actual math. Using a widely accepted retirement target needing about 25 times your annual spending, invest a version of what's often called the 4% rule. Assuming a real, inflation-adjusted return of about 5% a year. Someone who saves 5% of their income and spends the rest needs roughly 66 years saving to reach financial independence. Nobody has 66 working years. That plain doesn't work, full stop. Someone who saves 10% needs about 51 years, still brutal. Bump it to 15, and it drops to around 43 years. At a 25% savings rate, meaning you're living on 75% of your take-home pay, the number falls off a cliff to roughly 32 years. That's a normal career. At 50, living on half your income and investing the other half, you're looking at around 17 years, less than 2 decades. At 65, it's closer to 10 years. And at 75%, genuinely difficult, but not impossible for people with high incomes and modest housing costs, you're down to around 7 years. Sit with the shape of that curve for a second, because it is not a straight line, and that's the whole point. Going from a 5% savings rate to a 15% savings rate only shaves off about 23 years. But going from a 50% savings rate to a 65% savings rate shaves off 7 years. The closer you get to saving half your income or more, the more explosively each additional percentage point pays off. Because you're simultaneously doing 2 things at once: building a bigger pile of capital, and shrinking the size of the target you need to hit. Since you need less money to support a linear lifestyle, your savings rate is quietly the single most powerful lever in this entire equation. More powerful than your salary, more powerful than which specific fund you pick, more powerful than almost anything else you could optimize. This is also, I think, the most quietly rebellious idea in all of personal finance, because it means the deciding factor in how fast you build real wealth has almost nothing to do with how much you earn. A person making $50,000 a year who lives on $25,000 and invests the rest is on a faster path to financial freedom than a person making $150,000 a year who spends $140,000 of it. Income determines your ceiling. Savings rate determines your speed. And speed is the thing almost nobody talks about, because earn more makes for a better headline than want less. I want to be honest with you here, because this isn't a magic trick, and I'm not going to pretend it is. Getting your savings rate 50% or 65% is genuinely hard, And for a lot of people dealing with rent and eat a fair paycheck, medical bills, or supporting family, it may simply not be realistic right now. And that's not a personal failure, it's a real constraint, not a discipline problem. The math is honest about the destination, but it doesn't pretend the road is right for everyone. What the math does give you, though, is something incredibly useful even if you can only move your savings rate from 8% to 14%. It gives you a way to see, in concrete years, exactly what that change is worth. It turns a vague feeling of I should probably save more into a specific, motivating number. This one shift could take a decade off your working life. So how do you actually move that number in real life? Without a script that just says spend less, a few things matter more than the rest. The first is where the money goes before you ever see it. This sounds almost too simple to be real advice, but the data on automatic enrollment in retirement accounts backs it up again and again. When saving is the default and you have to actively opt out, far more people end up saving, and they save consistently. Compared to when saving requires an active monthly decision, willpower is a terrible long-term strategy because willpower runs out. A standing automatic transfer the day your paycheck lands doesn't run out. It just happens, the same way your rent gets paid whether you feel like it or not. The second is using the tax advantage containers that already exist for this exact purpose. Because leaving them empty is like refusing a raise nobody has to approve. In the US for 2026, you can put up to $24,500 into a 401k if your employer offers one, and up to $7,500 into an IRA. And if your employer matches any part of your 401k contribution, that match is, quite literally, free money attached to your paycheck that you are choosing to walk away from if you don't contribute enough to claim it. This is an investment advice about which stock to buy. It's closer to a reminder that there's a pile of money on the table with your name already on it, and a lot of people simply never bother to pick it up. The third is understanding that FEs are a silent week, and they matter more than most people assume. Because a fee doesn't just cost you the fee, it costs you every year of compounding that fee could have generated for the rest of your life. A fund charging 1% a year versus one charging 0.05% a year doesn't sound like a big gap on paper. Run it out over 30 years on a meaningful balance, and that difference alone can quietly erase tens of thousands of dollars. Not because the more expensive fund performed worse, necessarily, but because a percent of your balance disappears every single year before it ever gets the chance to compound. Now, let's talk about the part of this journey nobody warned you about honestly enough, which is what it actually feels like to live through the slow years. Because here is the uncomfortable truth, for most people, the first 5 to 10 years of investing feel like absolutely nothing is happening. You check your account, it went up $40 this month. You check it again next month. It went up $60. Meanwhile, you're watching people online flaunting gains that make your $40 look like a rounding error. And it is deeply, viscerally tempting to conclude that this slow, boring approach simply doesn't work. That you need to find something faster, a hot stock, a certain coin, a system. I want to be straight with you. That temptation is not a character flaw. It's your brain doing exactly what evolution built it to do, which is to weight immediate, vivid, visible rewards far more heavily than distant, abstract ones. The math doesn't care how it feels. The math is still working silently in the background during every single one of those unremarkable months, laying down the foundation that later years will build on. The years that feel the most pointless are, mathematically, doing the most irreplaceable work, because they're the years further from your retirement date, meaning they have the most doublings left ahead of them. There's also a harder, more uncomfortable truth buried in Maya and Jordan's stories that I don't want to gloss over, because I've seen it wreck people's confidence when they discover it too late. Waiting isn't neutral. It isn't a safe, do nothing default while you figure things out. Every year you delay starting is a year that never gets replaced. because you can borrow time from your future self to hand to your past self. If Maya had waited until 30 to start her 10 years instead of starting at 25, her final number at 65 dropped meaningfully, not because she saved less money, but because those 5 extra years of doubling, sitting right at the front of a whole timeline where doublings matter most, simply vanish. This is why the popular idea of "I'll get serious about investing once I make more money" can be a surprisingly expensive trade, even when it feels responsible. Sometimes the more expensive decision isn't spending too much, it's waiting too long to start, no matter how small the starting amount is. And that leads to maybe the single most freeing idea in this entire topic. One that I think gets buried under all the intimidating jargon about asset allocation and expense ratios and tax loss harvesting. You do not need to have it figured out. You do not need $10,000 sitting around to really start. You need a small, automatic, boring habit that begins now, today, this week. Even if it's $50 a month. Because $50 a month started today is worth dramatically more than $500 a month started 5 years from now, purely because of how many doublings it gets to experience. The amount matters far less than most people think. The starting date matters far more than almost anyone tells you. So here's the blunt, foolproof version of everything above. Stripped down to what you can actually act on tonight, no jargon required. Figure out roughly what percentage of your take-home pay you're currently keeping and investing, not spending, keeping. If you don't know that number, that's step 0, and it takes 20 minutes with a bank statement. Then pick one lever to move it, even slightly. Set up an automatic transfer the day you get paid. So the decision only has to be made once instead of every single month. Capture any employer match you're currently leaving on the table, because that's the closest thing to free money you will ever be offered. Check what you're actually paying in fees on whatever accounts you already have, because a fee you don't notice is still a fee that compounds against you. Do not wait until you have more money, more time, more certainty, or a better job to start this. The version of you starting today with $50 will, decades from now, be sitting on more than a version of you who waited for the right moment that, as we saw with Maya and Jordan, mathematically never needed to exist in the first place. Maya didn't outsmart Jordan. She didn't pick better investments, work a better job, or get lucky with timing. She simply gave her money a 10-year head start and then got out of its way. That's the entire trick, and it's available to literally anyone reading this sentence, starting the moment they close this and open their banking app. The years feel slow because that's exactly what the beginning of compounding is supposed to feel like. The only real mistake is mistaking that slowness for proof that nothing is happening.